You may recognize these images from popular culture. They are images of Saint Mother Teresa, who has been glorified by the public, often viewed as an ideal humanitarian who can do no wrong. But how much do you really know about Mother Teresa? The idea that Mother Teresa is the pinnacle of human kindness has persisted in popular culture for decades. Her devotion, faith, and global recognition has earned her the praise and admiration of many people, often regarding her as a living saint during her lifetime. Through this reputation, she acquired many advocates, who consider her one of the greatest humanitarians of all time. And although she did do an extensive amount of work to relieve the suffering of the less fortunate, there's a widely discussed challenge to the notion that she was a great humanitarian. This image that the public has endowed upon her has overshadowed her most controversial contributions to the less fortunate and her true role as a humanitarian. Mother Teresa is often seen as a warm-hearted woman who devoted her life to caring for the sick and poor. She was the recipient of many honors and accomplishments, such as numerous honorary degrees from prestigious universities, including Harvard and Georgetown. She was also the recipient of the Nobel Peace Prize for her humanitarian work, but there's much evidence that humanitarian may not be the correct label for her. Therefore, a more precise understanding of what it means to be a humanitarian is required to properly examine Mother Teresa and her social work. The United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, OCHA, is the United Nations governing body who oversees humanitarian efforts throughout the world. There are 4 humanitarian principles that OCHA considers the foundation for humanitarian action and guides all their activities in accordance with. The first of OCHA's humanitarian principles is humanity, defined as human suffering must be addressed wherever it is found. The purpose of humanitarian action is to protect life and health and ensure respect for human beings. Mother Teresa may have addressed suffering wherever it was found by claiming to have never turned away a patient from her care, but she did not address it in such a way that protected life, health, or ensured respect for human beings. Despite her clinics receiving millions of dollars in donations, the conditions were less than ideal to say the least. There was an unsettling lack of proper hospice care, medication, and systematic diagnosis. Mother Teresa refused to use her funding to provide modern medical treatment for the sick and impoverished people of Calcutta, frequently only providing prayers, believing that suffering brought people closer to God. She once described suffering to a dying cancer patient surrounded by her children as an opportunity to share in the Passion of Christ. That meant Jesus was so close that he could kiss you. To which the cancer patient replied, "Please tell Jesus to stop kissing me." Mother Teresa also had several contentious political contacts, like Haitian dictator Jean-Claude Duvalier and Albanian dictator Enver Hoxha. Doing this violates another OCHA principle, and that is of neutrality. Neutrality means that humanitarian actors must not take sides in hostilities or engage in controversies of political, racial, religious, or ideological nature. Besides from having suspicious relationships with 2 murderous dictators, Teresa violated the principle of neutrality by having a clear political agenda against contraception, abortion, and divorce. This is seen in her public opposition of abortion, calling abortion the greatest destroyer of peace in her Nobel Prize acceptance speech, and publicly advocating a no vote in the Irish referendum to end the country's constitutional ban on divorce and remarriage. Both of these OCHA violations lead to her violating her third and final OCHA principle, and that is of independence, the idea that humanitarian action must be autonomous from the political, economic, military, or other objectives that any actor may hold in relation to areas where humanitarian action is being implemented. Independence is breached by Mother Teresa through her immense loyalty to the Catholic Church. Christopher Hitchens, the essayist, public intellectual, and social critic, was an outspoken critic of Mother Teresa. He wrote, "Mother Teresa was not a friend of the poor. She was a friend of poverty. She said suffering was a gift from God. She spent her life opposing the only known cure for poverty, which is the empowerment of women and the emancipation of them from a livestock version of compulsory reproduction." After speaking to Teresa at the Vatican, Hitchens accounted, "It was by talking to her that I discovered, and she assured me, that she wasn't working to alleviate poverty. She was working to increase the number of Catholics. She said, I am not a social worker. I don't do it for this reason. I do it for Christ. I do it for the Church." Consistent with her extremist policies, she also tolerated the reuse of unsterilized needles, inadequate medical care, and the withholding of pain medication in her hospitals that became known as houses of the dying. She forbade and obstructed contraceptive use in a place where unwanted pregnancies meant starvation, stunted lives, and the subjugation of women. And she likely funneled millions of dollars from her charities into the bank account of the Catholic Church. Mother Teresa was not an evil human being. Her Georgetown honorary degree citation stated, "She has so vividly renewed the love of Jesus Christ for the wretched of the earth, whom our political and economic structures have pushed aside." She proclaimed her mission was to care for all those people who felt unwanted, unloved, uncared for throughout society, and there's no evidence that she ever showed any bias towards any of her patients. And in doing so, she complied with the fourth humanitarian principle of impartiality, the idea that humanitarian action must be carried out on the basis of need alone, making no distinctions on the basis of nationality, race, gender, religious belief, class, or political opinions. However, despite some compliance to the humanitarian standards, Mother Teresa's legacy is forever stained. Humanitarians are required to observe all 4 of OCHA's principles, and Mother Teresa, only following the principle of impartiality, only ensured that every one of her patients, regardless of nationality, race, gender, religious belief, class, or political opinions, received the same mediocre treatment and imposed extremist ideology. As a Catholic missionary, Mother Teresa's primary goal was evangelism, not humanitarianism. Her goal was to seek converts, and her strategy was to do so through her charity work, undoubtedly because she believed it was the most productive way. Her allegiance belonged to the Church, not to the impoverished.